Welcome to the Business of Fashion Basics. We're here today to talk about setting up a fashion business. But before getting into the nitty-gritty of how to run a fashion business, I thought I might start with a reality check. And that's really to answer the question, do I really want to run a fashion business? Or rather, do you really want to run a fashion business? There's a lot of things you need to know about running a fashion business even before you start. These are some of the things that I think people should think about. First of all, it takes a lot more money than you might think. Running a fashion enterprise, even a small one, requires capital, and it requires money to make it work. Now, capital and money don't guarantee success, but without access to capital and access to funding, running and growing a fashion business can be very, very difficult. That's not to say that you can't find really creative, enterprising, resourceful ways to find capital and to kind of access funding. But if you don't have the building blocks of capital to help finance and grow your business, to hire staff, to buy materials, to work with PR companies, to set up a website, all of those kinds of things, a lot of those things require money. And so the amount of money that it takes is often more than a lot of people realize. So that's the first thing you should know. The second thing is that running a business, any kind of business, whether that be a fashion business or another kind of business, as an entrepreneur, you will basically live, eat, breathe, sleep, and die by your business. Running a business is kind of an all-consuming 100% commitment. And as your business grows and as you start building a team, you'll find that not only are you worrying about the business, you're also worrying about people. And running that kind of, it's a very intense thing. And I think oftentimes that's not something that people are taught in fashion school. It's not something that you're taught in a lot of places. But unless you realize the commitment that you're making by going into a business in advance and the kind of time and energy and passion that it takes, people can often find themselves really, really surprised a couple of years down the road when they're swimming in stuff to do and they didn't realize what they were getting into. The third thing is, and this really makes fashion quite a distinct business from a lot of other industries. There's a lot of attention on the tech industry right now. And you hear these stories of a guy in a garage who comes up with some algorithm or some kind of app idea, and like the next day, they have millions of users and lots of money, and they're on the front page of Wired magazine. The fashion industry and fashion business, almost by definition, they take longer. It's a long-term commitment you're making. Building brands, which is essentially what a lot of you will be aiming to do in the coming years, it takes time. And that's something that you have to understand, but it's also something that the people that you work with have to understand. The different parties and partners that you work with have to understand. Fashion businesses are not created overnight. They take years and years and years. And without recognizing and understanding the amount of time it takes, people often don't really think about what that means in terms of my previous point, which is that you're going to be eating and living and breathing your business for a very, very long time. This is often probably one of the most surprising points for designers, is that actually you'll probably spent less than 10% of your time designing. And in a way, you should really be thinking of yourself as a CEO or entrepreneur first and a designer second. Even if you are the creative person in your business and the ideas and the designs are coming from your vision, you'll also have to spend a lot of time doing other things that perhaps you haven't been trained for, perhaps you don't like, and perhaps you haven't really thought about in advance. And I've mentioned managing people, but that also means accounting, finance, HR, marketing, a whole myriad of things that some of these words might not even be clear to you in your head of what they mean, and hopefully through this series we'll be able to provide a little bit more detail on that. But managing and running a fashion business is 90% about things other than design. And so you really have to be comfortable with the idea that actually, if you want to be a pure designer, if you want to spend all your time designer, perhaps running a fashion business isn't the right place for you. You could go spend 100% of your time designing in someone else's business and leave the management to them. But if you are going to build your own business, you're going to have to find a way of balancing your interest and motivation to design with all of the other things that makes your design sustainable. Being an entrepreneur also demands what I call militant self-discipline. There are no people managing your deadlines for you. There's no professors or tutors, reminding you regularly about, your assignments that are due. There's no one to wake you up in the morning or to make sure you get enough sleep at night. All of it comes from you. The discipline to build and run a business has to come from your own motivation and your own passion to run a business. And so, when we're thinking about starting your day and thinking about all the things you have to do, you'll have to want to get out of bed and get it all done, right? And there'll be certain days when you don't want to. You're not feeling well. You're feeling tired. You're not feeling motivated. You had, a bad night, or something's going on in your personal life, and you'll have to put all of that aside and put your business first. And that means being disciplined about it. And that's really about character. So often when I meet young designers who are just starting out, in addition to their designs and their creative ideas, I'm also interested in their character. Do they have the motivation, discipline, integrity, and focus to really be an entrepreneur? And that's something you should really think about. Young people who dream about building fashion businesses or becoming fashion designers, really without the kind of thick skin and toughness to work in this industry, which is a very, very competitive industry, especially now that the profile of the fashion industry has grown so much. And and everybody sees shows like Project Runway and other exposure to the fashion industry, which has really opened up. So many more people are interested in fashion. And that makes it even tougher to succeed, even harder to make a mark. So you have to be tough. You have to really, really be able to stand up and say, I'm going to do this. Even if you're feeling not so confident, even if something's gone wrong, you have to give that idea of confidence and toughness that you can do it. Because that's what people will look for. Buyers will look for that in you when they're evaluating your collection. Is this someone I'm buying into? I'm not just buying into their collection, I'm buying into the person, especially as young designers, because so many of these retailers have been burned by designers who just don't deliver, right? So they're going to be even harder on you. They're going to be even more exacting. So you have to be tough. And finally, the reality is that especially if you're the sole founder of a business, you're kind of on your own, especially at the beginning when you're just starting out, and you might have, one or two interns or, one or two part-time employees working with you. You often can find it a very lonely experience, being that person at the helm of your brand. And it's interesting because I think from the outside, people look at young fashion designers and they think, wow, it's so glamorous. You get to go to parties, you get to hobnob with the rich and famous, you get to meet all of these exciting people. But at the end of the day, you leave that party, you go home, you sit, and you think about what you have to get done the next day. And there's like I said earlier, there's no one who's going to be, monitoring or managing you. You have to manage yourself. And if you're doing that on your own, it can be quite lonely. Those are the things you should know before you start a fashion business. Another thing that I like to cover at the very beginning when talking to young designers about setting up a business is something I call the life cycle of a fashion business.
What is the life cycle of a fashion business? At the very early stage of a fashion business, it's all systems go. You're out pounding the pavement, and if you're lucky and perseverant, within the first few seasons you've got a couple of stockists and some press attention. Your business may be gathering momentum, but it's at this critical time that many fashion businesses begin to run into challenges. Either they run out of money because of cash flow problems, or they aren't able to deliver their collections on time because they haven't sorted out their production, or they give up because it's just too much work. In fact, more than 90% of fashion startups will fail in the first 3 to 5 years. But this doesn't mean things are over for you as a designer. A lot of designers have had their businesses fail, but they persevered and tried over and over again until they figured it all out. The businesses that do go past that 3 to 5 year time frame fall into two groups. Some are small, mature businesses that continue to turn a regular profit, but fail to scale further. The others build a very special kind of fashion business, one that is profitable and continues to grow and have an impact on the whole fashion industry.
So assuming you knew all of the things that I said that you should know up front, and you understand that most fashion businesses aren't going to last, what are the different elements of running a fashion business? We've talked about this earlier, in that as a fashion designer, in your formal education, what they'll teach you at St. Martin's or Parsons or the Academy in Antwerp or wherever it may be, they'll teach you how to design. They'll teach you everything related to design and development, which is the very first step of what I call the fashion value chain. What they'll often not teach you is all of the other things that need to happen after design and development to actually make the business work. And I actually find it surprising, because your ability to succeed as a designer in a fashion business rests not only on your creativity, it rests on your ability to do all these other things. So let's talk about the steps in the fashion value chain. The first, as I mentioned, is design and development. And very broadly speaking, that includes, of course, designing a collection, making patterns, developing samples, researching textiles and fabrics, understanding all of the elements of research and development that come into creating a collection. That's the first step. That's the step that I think you all know pretty well. The second step is then, how am I going to produce that collection at scale? So the people who are at the earlier stages of their business, because of the volumes, the relatively low volumes of what they're selling, you're able to make both your sample collections and your commercial collections in-house. That can't last forever, right? As your business grows, as you start selling to more and more buyers, what you'll find is you need to find production partners to help you produce your collections at scale. And that adds a whole new element of complexity to your business, because all of a sudden, the things that you're doing in this kind of really artisanal way in your studio or your atelier, you need to find someone else who can do it in multiple quantities, often at a distance from you, and you have to manage that relationship. All of a sudden, then you have to worry about deliveries and logistics and quality control. So managing a production supply chain is a really, really critical part to scaling a business. And often designers find it hard to work with factories, especially at the early stages, because they'll look at you and they say, you're only producing 10 units of this. They're used to producing in the hundreds or in the thousands of units. So again, some of the best young designers I know, they'll show up with their collections to a factory and they will convince the factory owner that they're worth investing in. Because essentially, at that stage of development, the production partner is taking a bet on you. There's probably hundreds of young brands that they could work with. Why should they choose you? Well, they should choose you because you have that something special. You have something distinctive. And they trust you. Right? They believe that you will be someone that they can work with. So again, this whole idea of character, and you'll see I'll repeat it over and over again today, but the way you work with other people the way you partner with people is essential to building out your business in every step. So production and supply chain is about sourcing materials and fabrics, managing logistics, delivery, all of that kind of stuff. Then you have this idea of marketing and communication. And you won't really be able to sell your collection unless people know it exists. So how are you going to create demand? How are you going to create interest in your products if nobody knows about them? And this is a part of the fashion industry that's really in a period of massive transformation at the moment. In the pre-digital era, fashion communication and marketing rested almost 100% on advertising, PR, and shows. In the digital age, where we have social media, we have Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of these other tools to communicate about our collections, there's a whole myriad of options available to you now to help people know that your brand exists. And excitingly, for young designers, young businesses, most of those tools are free. You still have to create content to populate the feeds that everyone's looking at on their phones all the time. But if you have the content, if you have the ideas, there's really interesting and inexpensive ways of building awareness about your collections. So, this is where the idea of brand development, public relations, marketing, presentations, social media, all of those different elements come together. And then finally, you have this idea of sales and distribution, right? If you've got the vision and the ideas, you've got the right production partners, you've created the demand or interest in your products, the last step is to distribute and sell those products, right? And that, at the early stage of your business, will involve wholesale, so selling to retailers, whether they be online or offline retailers, and eventually could include having your own retail, either through an e-commerce website or a physical store. And then there's also things like trunk shows and other things you can do to generate revenue and sell your collection. But primarily we're talking about wholesale and retail. So those are the 4 steps of a fashion value chain: design and development, production and supply chain, marketing and communication, and sales and distribution. What are the critical success factors to building a successful fashion business? 1, bring something unique to the market. Have something unique, interesting, distinctive to say. And that's really, at the early stage of developing your brand, spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I think that's what fashion school is about, really. At fashion school, you should be really trying to hone your point of view. It shouldn't be necessarily about commerciality or anything related specifically to business building. It should really be about nourishing and nurturing your creativity. 2, build that team and start with finding a business partner that you can partner with to help actualize and realize the business that you want to build. No fashion business is built on the shoulders of a single person. It requires a team. Use your network of contacts. If you've been lucky to attend one of these prestigious fashion schools, as many of you here have, those people are your network. Continue to build that network over time. Continue to cultivate those relationships. Don't be afraid to ask for advice or ask for help. Oftentimes, as you'll find, hopefully, the same challenges that you're facing are being faced by other people at the same stage of their business. There are some lessons that you can learn from each other. And finally, manage your cash really tightly. Generate revenue, but also manage cash really, really carefully. Cash management is incredibly important. I've seen too many designers in situations where they go and have a bunch of orders that they've received, and they find that they just don't have the cash to buy the raw materials to deliver those orders. If you don't deliver the orders, you shatter confidence amongst the retailers, and it's very hard to build confidence back once it's been lost. Cash is really, really critical. That kind of concludes the first lecture, which is like, do I really want to run a fashion business? And as you can see, and as some of you know in this room, it's really not easy. But if you can think about all of the things that we discussed, and think about, building the team around you, managing cash properly, and having something really unique to offer the market, then perhaps you're ready for the next step.